Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to the October EESN webinar. We're delighted to be presenting Ann Dodge and Oliver Sellers on building resiliency in cities. And we're delighted that you're here. EESN is a group of alumni groups, MIT alumni groups, which is designed to try and connect us and to help inform and educate us about energy, environment, and sustainability. Today, often we call that climate. And we connect people by these monthly webinars. We connect the speakers by always trying to have several speakers on our webinars. And we also are concerned about these groups of people working together with the incredible synergy that comes between MIT alums to do projects and to get action taken. Our audiences, our alumni audiences, and welcome everybody else in the world. It's just that we target alums. Our audiences have to do with like clean energy and innovation and business and the actual widgets that are going to make things happen. We have an audience which is about policy and governance and how decisions are made. It could be the top of a big corporation. Which is a decision maker. We want to make sure that we not influence, I shouldn't say that we are able to help make better decisions. And we also have an audience of research and university staff who are working on all the different systems of the world and looking at some of the impacts. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about, this is a webinar, the chat function. You will not be able to write into the chat function if you're an attendee. However, the panelists will be able to put information out to you. For example, right now, Amy Davis, one of our great liaisons from the Alumni Association, will put the EESN website into the chat. So you'll be able to see our main page and our upcoming meetings and all. Please put all your questions and answers into the question and answer box, and we will wait until the end of the presentations to talk about those and to expand on what our speakers have told us about during the webinar. So with that, we are going to make both the slides available and the recording of this webinar. The webinar recording will not show up quickly after the end of the webinar because we get it captioned and it will be up on YouTube on the Alumni Association YouTube channel and our own EESN playlist. But the slides we will be able to post fairly quickly. And again, you should go to our website and look for past EESN webinars, which is there's a link on the homepage and there are links under different menus. So thank you for coming. And Ramon, why don't you tell us a little bit about these speakers today?
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome also everyone. We think we have a very good program here for you today here. I'm going to introduce both speakers first, and then they'll go one after the other. First, we'll have Oliver Sellers-Garcia, who has a master's city planning from the Institute from 2006, and a bachelor's in urban studies and French from Columbia University. Oliver has directed the Mayor's Office for Sustainability and Environment in Somerville, Massachusetts since 2014, where he's responsible for sustainability and municipal operations and policy programs and long-range planning for the community. As part of his job, he leads the initiatives on climate, resource conservation, and environmental protection. Prior to joining the city of Somerville, he managed projects for local governments and state agencies at the environmental consulting firm CDM Smith. He helped clients around the country and around the world, integrating sustainability and climate change into physical and organizational planning. Oliver is a certified lead AP and also holds a certification from the American Institute of Certified Planners. I'll mention I have served on the same city's Commission on Energy Use and Climate Change for a few years. We have monthly meetings, and Oliver is a key member present at each of those meetings on behalf of the city. So it's been a pleasure working with and collaborating. Our second speaker is Ann Dodge, who also received an NCP from the same year, 2006, at MIT, following her BA from Harvard on a joint concentration on visual and environmental studies and history. Anne is an urban planner and designer with 7 years experience in higher education and 20 years experience working at the intersection of culture, arts, and economic development across different sectors. She is the executive director of the Mansueto Institute at the University of Chicago, where her work advances research into the fundamental processes that drive and sustain cities a lot, creating an evidence base for scalable change. She's worked at the National Public Housing Museum, the Driehaus and Donnelly Foundations, the Local Initiative Support Coalition in New York City, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation and the Fannie Mae Foundation. Keeps busy. She is also a writer and storyteller who works in digital media. So we're pleased to have you both. And without any further delay, Oliver, it's your.
Okay, great. So as I start sharing my presentation, I just want to say thank you. First of all, I'm assuming everyone can see this, and I will get started. So I wanted to say thank you to the network and also to Amy and Lizzie for helping out here. And Sarah, thank you for the introduction. And Ramon, it's so nice to see you in this different forum. And also, I'm so happy to share the virtual stage here with my classmate and friend, Ann Dodge. So I'm going to look at the clock now and make sure that I don't speak too long, but please, Ramon, give me a time check. So as Ramon mentioned, I'm the director of the Office of Sustainability and Environment for the city of Somerville. And this is just a little bit about what I'm going to talk about today. So I'll just give you a little bit of background on Somerville and our office. And I'm going to focus my comments on our climate change planning. So talking a little bit about the technical analysis that supports our planning and then our actual climate action planning. And then I'll close with some reflections about what it's like to do climate action at the municipal level and what it's been like in Somerville. So I don't know how many of you live in Somerville, but I do know that all of you have spent some time very close to Somerville. So I'm not going to give you the full description of what Somerville is like that I do to some audiences, but just a refresher, Somerville is a city of over 80,000 people. We are 2/3 renters. It's a very small city. It's under 4 square miles of land, and fully 1/4 of that is roads. We're the densest city in New England, and this might have changed since some alumni were next door. We're served by the red and the orange line, and in a matter of months, also by the green line, which will extend all the way through Somerville. Somerville was the first municipality in Massachusetts to set a economy-wide carbon neutrality goal for 2050, which I'm happy to say is nothing unique anymore. It seems that almost any city that's working in climate has set that goal or a more ambitious one. And as a matter of fact, all of the cities in the Boston metro area that constitute the Metro Mayors Coalition, those are the 15 core inner urban communities, have the same shared goal. My office, the Office of Sustainability and Environment, is located in the mayor's office organizationally. And we are focused on policy, planning, and programs on climate and sustainability. And we also do a lot of internal support for other departments inside of the city government. And our scope covers both city operations, so think Chief Sustainability Officer, but we're also the climate and environment agency for the city. So now I'm going to give you a little bit of background on what our climate baseline is like. So where are we in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions and our vulnerabilities to climate change? So first, I'm just going to say, I'm going to throw a lot of numbers and diagrams at you, and there's many more, which I'm sure you would love to look at. All of this information is on our website, somervillema.gov/SustainaVille. you'll see the cute little name at the bottom of my slides. I think the URL will pop up in the chat soon, and I also have it on my last slide. So you'll be able to get a lot of that information there. So we've been doing greenhouse gas measurement every 2 years. Here's some highlights from 2016 that are interesting, but for better or for worse, there hasn't been a dramatic change. So this is relatively relevant. So our emissions are 2/3 from buildings. So that is both combustion in buildings and also energy use in buildings. About 1/3 of our emissions are from transportation, and the vast majority of that is personal vehicles. And then a sliver, about 3%, is from waste. So just to put that into context, if we were going to try to sequester the carbon with trees, we would have to plant a forest 185 times the size of Somerville every year. So that's not an actual strategy that I'm proposing, but just to put that into some context. Let's see, I'm going to advance the next slide here. So then now shifting to municipal government, we actually constitute less than 2% of community emissions, but as the operators of the city government, we measure this closely and have our own sort of separate efforts on reducing our own carbon profile. And this is different than the community at large. The vast majority, almost 3/4, is from our buildings. We also have a small portion that's our fleet and other equipment, and then a decent amount, which is public lighting. So moving on to the next slide. This is a study, a slide from a study that we did in 2016, which at the time was very cutting edge. And now I think you've probably seen many places do this sort of analysis, which is basically, all right, we know what our actual current emissions are. What could we do in terms of getting down to zero? Would it even be possible if we used current or feasible technologies and practices? How far could we go? And so the headline here is there's a few different things that we need to do. We need to work on efficiency. We need to switch to electricity, and we need to have electricity be carbon free. So another way to look at that is how these things all stack up on top of each other. So the yellow portion is what will happen if we have zero carbon electricity. So it's interesting to see it can have an enormous impact in the end, but that alone won't do anything to actually reduce our net emissions. We have to do fuel switching in buildings, and what that really means is we need to heat our buildings in Somerville with electricity. And then the purple is switching vehicles. So another thing to note about this, which is interesting, is that you'll see transit-oriented development, which is that I can't even tell you what color it is. It's so small. So that you think, wow, that's a surprise. I thought like the way we built would have more of an impact on that. Well, the reality is that Somerville is a transit-oriented community. We were developed that way in the late 19th and early 20th century. So this would look very different for a city in Arizona, for example, that would require a totally different land use pattern in order to take advantage of transit. But that's not the case in a city like ours. So now looking at the other side of climate change, we have done a vulnerability assessment to look at what are our risks, no matter what we do with carbon emissions. And I've been happy to hear a lot of this in the news media recently, which is more of a broadening of the context of how we are actually going to be stuck with 30 to 50 years of increasing severity of climate impacts, regardless of what we do with emissions. So what I'm telling you here in the next few slides is projections of what is going to happen, regardless of what I just talked about as potential mitigation strategies. So the first is looking at heat. And we see a, not a surprise, a projection of more heat days in the summer. And this last summer really, was a perfect, unfortunate example of that. And what is particularly important to think about in terms of heat is that it has a much greater impact in urban areas where the urban heat island effect can mean that, human bodies don't have a chance to cool down at night, and other environmental impacts are exacerbated by an increasing number of days over 90 degrees. Another one of Somerville's greatest threats from climate change is street flooding or precipitation-related flooding. So this is the result of a model that we did with higher resolution of our stormwater drainage system, showing what, the depth of flooding from a storm that has a 1% chance of happening under the kinds of conditions that we would expect to see in 2070. And so what you see there is quite a bit of flooding. If you know Somerville, you'll immediately recognize these areas. But if you don't, where you see some of the darkest depths are what are our greatest redevelopment areas, where right now there is an enormous amount of investment going in for new lab buildings and high density residential. Now, looking at our third major climate risk is coastal flooding. Relative to our neighbors, Cambridge and Boston, we are much less exposed, as you can see from this map, which is a same sort of storm scenario, but with the sort of sea level rise that you would expect to see in 2070. But the point is not that, Somerville is great because we are on a bunch of hills, but the reality is that we're actually interconnected, both our transportation systems and our economy. And so the takeaway for us from the coastal risk is that this is a threat that we have to tackle regionally, not one where we work on our own drainage system, where we work on heat mitigation measures for the people in Somerville. This is one where it's about the whole region. So what I just did is walk you through at a very quick pace some of the analysis that we did between 2014 and 2017 as the technical basis for Somerville's first climate action plan, which we released at the end of 2018, which is Somerville Climate Forward. It's Somerville's first climate action plan. And it focused on 13 actions for greenhouse gas reductions, resilience, and equity. This was a plan that was very community focused. So we had, I think it was 13 different working groups with a total of 75 people. And then we had consultants. It was, what you would think of as a community planning process. But it was really sitting on top of years of very technical analysis. And the focus was to zero in on the things that we need to do to get started in the next 5 years. And we're halfway through those 5 years now. And unlike a lot of climate action plans that municipalities have been putting out, for the last 15 years, we didn't focus too much on particularly complicated metrics and measurement. This is a plan about getting started. And our main measure for how we're doing towards our progress is not exactly the number of greenhouse gas emissions that have been reduced, but really have we followed through on our commitments that our community stakeholders prioritized. So this is a slide that is far too much to read and absorb right now, but I just want to put it up so that we can go back to it in the Q&A, or if you're interested, you can look at it online. But this is our snapshot of the actions that are in the climate plan. So as you can see, they're broken into 5 different areas that relate to those priorities that I walked you through from the technical analysis: buildings, mobility, environment, community or people and leadership. And so every year since 2018, we've been producing progress reports. So you can go to our website and look at the 2020 and 2019 progress reports. And I highlighted a few of them here as well. This is also a slide that's too much to go through right now, but if you see something here that's interesting, jot it down and we can talk about it in the Q&A. But I'm going to highlight a couple of these that I thought would be interesting because they relate in a really clear way to the things that came out of our earlier analyses. So one is for emissions that come from buildings. While the vast majority of buildings that are going to be around in 2050 in Somerville have already been built, we are addressing new development as well. So we passed new citywide zoning in 2019, which provides some very attractive bonuses for developing all electric net zero buildings. So in some of these big development areas, you can effectively now trade unlimited height for developing a building that is net zero in all but its electricity procurement on day one. And we have been working, behind the scenes and in front of the camera to make sure that the net zero stretch code that the Massachusetts legislature instructed the Department of Energy Resources to create this year will allow for similar standards across the Commonwealth. In terms of what we do with coastal flooding impacts, we have been working, and we just finished a couple weeks ago, a wonderful project with the cities of Boston, Chelsea, Everett, Winthrop, and Revere that Somerville led on looking at a regional infrastructure vulnerability assessment that also looks at the social vulnerability of people in our communities and helps reprioritize what infrastructure investments should be if you think about the actual impact on the way the most vulnerable people in our communities live their lives. And just, a little bit of a teaser there, we all think about, bridges and dams, but one thing we've learned is that communication infrastructure has a disproportionate impact on most vulnerable people. So Ramon has come on, which means I have 1 minute left. And that is not much time to give you my reflections on Somerville and municipal climate action. So I guess what I'll say is, quickly, I am going to be stepping away from my position at the city of Somerville actually this week, and I'm moving on to the MBTA and a new position that is Director of Resiliency and Equity. And that has given me some time to stop and look back at what the last 7 years have been like in Somerville. And I guess what I'll say, because I don't want to take up too much of Anne's time, is that one of the things that I'm walking away from this position with is this really clear understanding that there is a lot that cities can do, but that, when we achieve a lot, we very quickly run up against the limits of municipal authority. And one of the things that we can do most effectively is to, keep a focus on the services that we have as a municipality and really target the things that matter, right? So where the emissions come from, as opposed to things that might be sort of in our news feeds and sound exciting, but aren't really going to get down to the carbon emissions. So I am going to stop there. If I get a chance to give you a more thoughtful reflection on this, I will do that. But I will pass it off to Anne now. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Oliver. I would love to hear your reflections after I run through my slides, because that was really, really fascinating. Let me go ahead and get started. Thank you so much to everyone from MIT Alumni EESN Network for inviting me, especially thanks to Oliver for recommending me as a speaker on this. I should say, it's interesting. I'm So I'm a planner trained like Oliver, but I have none of his certifications. I've been almost entirely in the nonprofit sector doing work that is somewhat to the side of sustainability for a long time. Mostly arts, community development work. And then, I came to the University of Chicago and started up what was then a very small urban initiative for the university, where they wanted to take their research out into the world. And the frame of urban for them also included, to some degree, sustainability, increasingly more and more. But so I'm coming at these questions now from where I sit at the Mansueto Institute for Urban Innovation. We're a 4-year-old research institute based at UChicago, and we look at cities as systems. My faculty lead is a complex systems scholar. So which I initially just kind of was a little skeptical about, as this is the person that's going to run the Urban Institute, a physicist. But it turns out that, just like Oliver was saying when he was talking about the flooding that's likely to, even though Somerville has a very small sort of shoreline, it's a systemic issue. And now finally, people are starting to understand that climate change is going to have to be tackled as a systemic issue, the system being the planet that we all live on. So we'll talk a little bit about that in this presentation. Okay. So just to give you a sense of where my work at the Institute, the perspective we take, we tend to be global when we talk about cities, and we tend to talk about urbanization when we talk about cities. So less about the mega cities that we all know, and a little bit more about the mega cities that are coming. And some of those numbers are here. They're pretty staggering when you think about the size of cities that the world is going to be supporting. Many of them in the global South. Yeah. Also interesting just to know that cities are really the place where most GDP as well as most CO2 emissions are coming from. So cities are kind of, if you wanted to think about how to understand and make change on a planetary basis, you might want to just sort of think about cities as your frame of reference. And here's another great slide just to kind of show you how much can be done urbanization, and how quickly, when a system gets behind the notion of urbanization. This is pretty remarkable. Hopefully some people on the call have had a chance to go to Shanghai, and this is already 10 years old. But that amount of change in just 2 decades is just sort of astonishing. And I think, when you're in the US or even in Europe, many of our cities have sort of fully urbanized. The country maybe not, but the city form is pretty sort of defined. But that's not the case in the rest of the world. And so it's those processes that we're trying to study. And again, it's a bit of a scientific approach to cities. So there is the belief, or rather the sort of knowledge at the Mansueto Institute with our researchers, that there are fundamental truths and processes that drive cities, that you can use, the new gold being data, that there's data everywhere, that much of it hasn't really been queried, and this certainly not by researchers to try to answer these questions. It's funny because when I was a DUSP, I don't think we had any sort of coursework like this. We weren't talking about complex systems. We weren't talking necessarily about data science. This was only 15 years ago. So what we're doing here at Mansueto is saying, look, we think that data science is giving us new ways of measuring and understanding urban processes, and let's do it, right? We work with industry, we work with government partners, we do a lot of work with NGOs internationally to try to really hack out what this new field of study is going to look like. And frankly, urban science as a phrase is problematic for some people. It certainly walks right up to urban planning and kind of pushes it on the shoulder a little bit. And we're figuring that out too. It's an emerging field. So our work is meant to be field defining. And it's meant to be international and true across contexts. So, number 5 is really important. We also try to talk about urbanization as an opportunity, not as a threat. We try to talk about it as cities as a source for great collective action. So it's easy to sort of slip into problematized language about cities, but you don't have to do that. You can still talk about them as places of growth. And this is, my boss doesn't love this slide, but this is the slide that I put together to try to explain what urban science is and try to draw an analogy to medicine. So if you think about medicine that you receive as a patient, there's a person who delivers it to you. It's a nurse, it's a doctor. That's a person who may have a PhD of their own. They certainly have an advanced degree. Then there are people who sit in the middle space and are creating the tools, devices, medicines, theories of application, whatever they might be. That's a whole different set of specialists. And I think in the domain of sort of urban and even climate, you have a lot of engineers, you have policymakers, you have people who are sort of making it work and figuring things out and coming up with solutions. And then on the far end of the slide, you have people in a lab who are really looking at what is fundamentally going on to make these things possible. And I think that those are the researchers that we are trying to work with. So it's perhaps a step away from applied work, pre-applied in some ways, which is puzzling for the institute that calls itself Urban Innovation. You'd think that all we do is hang out sensors, but we're trying to think, in addition to that, what do these things mean and what can we learn? What can science tell us? So how does it work in practice? If any of you have any relationship to UChicago, this is an in-joke with UChicago. They have a joke about, oh, it's great in practice, but how does it work in theory? So I just flipped it, yeah. So here are all the people that I work with. Louis Bettencourt is the faculty director who came with this very singular vision about how the Institute should build a field of urban science. A lot of our work is very boilerplate academic stuff. We're a hub for scholars, and we call ourselves a place that trains the next generation of urban scholars. So we have postdocs, graduate fellows, even some undergraduate fellows. And we have a whole set of research initiatives that are meant to be intersecting both disciplines and approaches. I think one of the things that I really do like about the approach that we've taken is that rather than think about, be an urban institute that has a bucket about housing and a bucket about infrastructure and a bucket about education, because a lot of urban research places will do that. They'll look at a sort of a municipal buckets of areas of influence and sort of institutions, and they will build a resource portfolio around an institution. And we've totally tried to break out of that and build a resource portfolio around ideas, which of course makes it that much harder to have impact at an institutional level and to see policy change or programmatic change at an institutional level. But it's UChicago. That's what we do. That's what we're good at. And frankly, there was a space in higher ed for someone to take on some of these questions in this way. So I'll walk through just a few of the types of things we do. It can be a little bit all over the map. We have an interest in ancient, because we think about cities across time and across context and truths that might be understandable across context. We have an interest in ancient cities and ancient urbanization processes. I also threw in this slide because it mentions Larry Vail, one of my beloved MIT professors. He came and gave a talk, which was wonderful. We have also a strong grounding in sociology and the Chicago School of Sociology. This was a really influential book that came out. What was it? This was the anniversary, 30, 40, 50, maybe 50 years. Someone in the Q&A will certainly correct me on that. But yeah, so we're taking a pretty intellectual and theoretical approach to understanding the processes that are behind some of these things. And then also we just get to do cool stuff with students. And in this case, I wanted to show this because the students in this group are working on a project that we launched called 1 Million Neighborhoods, which is an attempt to use this interface called OpenStreetMaps, which is basically the Wikipedia met Google Maps. It's a community generated map information. We realize that there are certain informal settlements or slums, as they're called typically by the people who live in them. students together to actually use the OpenStreetMaps interface to map these places, to map these unmapped places. And it's part of a larger research project we have going on, where we're using multiple data sets to understand what do these places look like and how might you be able to optimize them for some kind of infrastructure. So in this case, the students are using OpenStreetMaps, images and literally drawing the edges of informal settlements, shacks, houses, whatever they see. And the continuation of this project, which I'll get to later, we're using our own satellite imagery that we were able to get from the Gates Foundation just for a part of Africa, but it's yielding really incredible results and maps and a level of block level specificity about structures and pathways that's never been seen before. So it's very cool, this particular project. The one I'm just talking about is called A Million Neighborhoods. But briefly, I want to show you the Array of Things project, because this one is particularly relevant, I think, to sustainability, or it's, for me, easier to draw the connection. So this is one of those sensor projects. This was a project started by a scientist at Argonne National Lab who kind of parked it with us at Mansueto. And he managed to put up, I think, around 100 sensors. I think the original vision was 300. It had to get scaled back, but these are sensors that could do everything: air quality, light. They even had image capacity. They were meant to sort of give you it was billed as the Fitbit for the city. Obviously a little controversial in the early days, particularly because there were cameras and people didn't like that. But it was a really interesting and I would say successful project in the sense that it got the city to think about how to take its own pulse in this very local way. And then here is a screen grab of the map for Million Neighborhoods, which I think I sent the latest link. You should all check it out in the chat. Sarah can share that. But this is our informal settlements map. When we first built it, we used the OpenStreetMaps data that those students were all collecting. And now we're using even bigger and better data from Gates. So it's allowing us to look at what do these neighborhoods actually look like. It's amazing. Millions and millions of people, you all probably know this because you're smart MIT alums, but millions and millions of people live in informal settlements where there's no plumbing, no sanitation, no electricity, and they're making it work. But that is what rapid urbanization is doing. And these are often very vulnerable places, vulnerable to climate change, to flooding, to extreme weather events for obvious reasons. And they have a host of challenges, including that no one is really sure who owns the land, or some people may think that, they have a claim. And I'm not a land tenure expert, but I know that that's a big part of what makes these such difficult challenges to solve. Okay, next. And lastly, or I'm getting closer to the end of my slides, I thought it was worth mentioning that much of our work we talk about in the framing of the Sustainable Development Goals. Maybe some of you are familiar with these. These are a product of UN Habitat, which is an agency within the UN. And every 10 years, UN gets together and sort of creates a kind of a framework for moving forward together, UN Habitat specifically. And these SDGs, they go by the SDGs, are meant to be, these are meant to be goals that the international community, political, non-governmental, industry, can come together around and attempt to accomplish with one another by, I believe it's 2030. It's actually a pretty short timeline. And Oliver, when you were doing your slides and you listed the goals for the Somerville plan, I just saw immediately how so many of those map onto the UN SDGs. Being an American myself, I had literally not heard of these until my European boss was like, and of course we must talk about these. It was just news to me. You know what, we just don't talk about the UN very much here. But I have found that there's something really inspiring in being able to put your work inside, find a way that what you're doing connects to these, because then you can figure out, who else internationally is doing work that they would consider to be a best practice toward accomplishing one of these SDGs. Now, how do we know when we're going to get there? That's a whole nother question, but I did want to share this because I thought it's worth people knowing and understanding this framework for action. I'm going to ask the host, are you hearing a lot of whistling noise coming from in the background? I'm happy to go and shut the door if it's being distracting. Sarah.
It does sound like someone's practicing flute in your house. But I think we can deal with it. So
all right, well, I'm almost done, and then I will go shut the door while we do Q&A. Last slide, we had a really wonderful event that was about SDG 11, which is the sustainable development goal that has to do with cities and neighborhoods.
Sustainable cities, yeah.
Sustainable cities, and we are planning to have another one of these next fall. So please join our mailing list at miurban@uchicago.edu, miurban.uchicago.edu to be invited. And this is my closer so that you can understand at least what the Institute does. We're a hub for urban science, training the next generation of urban scholars. Thank you very much.
And thank you. We have had a couple of questions. I believe Oliver has been able to answer some of them. Methodologies used are on his website, as he was saying. Go ahead, Oliver. Can you unmute? And Ramon? And then there is a question remaining about municipalities in Europe that have been using hydrogen rather than fossil gas for many years. Is that part of a plan in Somerville? And has the Mansueto Institute looked into that kind of a replacement at all? People talk about it as renewable, but of course, if it comes from natural fossil gas, it does have a carbon impact.
So I didn't answer this question because the short answer is no, and it's not.
That's good. In the US, we don't do that.
have you done this? And then the answer is no. But I will say, just to make myself sound like a little more thoughtful, is that when we did our climate planning process, and Ramon was a part of it, who also but I think he was someone who has a very technical background, like all the MIT alumni here. A big part of the exercise was hearing and learning about all of the technology solutions that are out there, and then taking a deep breath and saying, okay, let's not get too excited about a lot of these, because this is really about like a governance and sort of like project management framework for pushing us through the next few years. And it did not involve a lot of piloting new technologies or trying to, leapfrog all of the utility jurisdictional issues that we would have to do in order to do something like hydrogen, and more about like, we got a lot of great ideas, but what are the ones that we're actually, maybe they don't sound too glamorous, but are the ones we have to do first. So I would say that for this crowd, I don't know what, all your fields of study were. It's like some of the conversations I have with friends where it's like, oh, and this cool thing and that cool thing and that cool thing. And yeah, like we have thought about a lot of these things, but they don't make it to the planning process because we're working at a totally different level.
Thank you. And next question, as long as you're...
I think Ramon wants to say something.
Go ahead, if he unmutes. When he unmutes, I should say.
Sorry about that. I was muted. No, there are a couple of questions that you answered in the Q&A chat box, Q&A box, that had to do with emissions methodology, and I thought maybe what we did before and what you're planning or we're planning to do. Maybe just a few comments about that for the folks in the audience might be relevant in terms of how you're going about doing that, and what are the pros and cons of how to go about doing that, because it can get pretty complex, or you can do a more adequate, affordable version.
And let me just add to that. The one question here is, has there been progress using district heating? So as you think about your emissions and where you're going to be able to get reductions, just quickly, how did your inventory work out so you could get your reductions go down to zero?
Yeah, so our analysis showed that we weren't actually ever going to make it down to zero. And that is useful because what that means is that we're going to have to think about offsets, and that can take lots of many forms. They could be financial, but they could also just be, a state or a country that thinks more sort of generally about how we balance out. So that's what I mean by offsets. So I partially answered that question with the geodistricts question that John Brown asked, I think. But I'd say that district energy never really pans out in terms of a scalable solution, at least in our current regulatory environment, because of all of the different issues that have to do with, and I might be speaking to an audience that knows this better than I, but in Massachusetts, no one can sell power across property lines. And so then we're just stuck with selling hot water or steam. And that works a lot better for campuses, and you really have to balance the loads. And so short of creating a municipal district authority, which we would have to get state legislative approval for. Okay, I'm not even going to finish that sentence. You've heard all of the regulatory things that get in the way. And so we, again, are prioritizing things that don't actually require all of these huge shifts, while knowing that it's time for us to speak up occasionally about what needs to happen at the state level in order to make that happen.
And in fact, Massachusetts did just pass a very major next generation roadmap bill that is going to lead to more districts and changes in the way our utilities regulation happens and all that kind of stuff. And it is somewhere that hopefully in 10 years can be straightened out a little. I wanted to go on to a question that was asked about. Let me see if I can find it again, because nope, I blew it. Does Mansueto have a similar take on the Array of Things project? Is the Array of Things project ongoing? There was Allison Novak is also asked how that compared with the MIT DUSP programs that are going on.
I just see all of these great questions from Allison, which I can try to answer. So the Array of Things project is winding down, but it has been reborn as a partnership with Microsoft Research. Let me see if I can find the website and I can share that with you guys. But Microsoft Research has an urban innovation lab, which we've started sort of partnering up on. And that lab has launched a Chicago-based pilot of these sensors so fast. It's kind of amazing. It took Charlie and his team, 3 or 4 years to get 30 sensors up, and Microsoft got 100 sensors up over the summer. But they're Microsoft, and they can kind of do things quickly, and people want to take their calls. So yes, there is a kind of a live project happening now that I think is not, they don't predict that it will last through the winter because they don't think the sensors are Chicago winter hardy, but they're currently just doing air quality measurements. So the Microsoft sensors don't have cameras. I don't think they have audio sensing. They're just air quality. And they're doing it in a really cool way too, where they partnered with a bunch of environmental justice groups in the city to put sensors near them, and also gave them micro grants to help them kind of create programming around the sensors and the data. So that's that question. And Mansueto, does it have a similar take on practical solutions at DUSP at MIT? I mean, I wish we did. I think the University of Chicago broadly has some more practical ways for students to try to sort of serve as many consultants on urban issues. The place where I work happens to be a bit like sort of like a step removed. It's truly a research institute, right? So we do have one kind of a curricular innovation, which is this program called Environmental Frontiers. So, I basically started this because we couldn't find an environmental researcher to come and work with us. So I said, okay, well, I think the campus has data. So we've been doing campus-based data analysis with the facilities office for the last 2 or 3 years. And it's turned out to be such a hit for the students that, now we're starting to try to call it research. It doesn't meet the very high bar of capital R research for a lot of people, but it's been an incredible, like a true practicum experience.
I have a quick question for both of you. And from your perspective, because the work that you're focused on is so cross-disciplinary on the one hand, and Oliver, because you're actually working in institutions that are, in the city trying to do things. And I'm, many of us, myself especially included, come from a technical background and are very excited and very interested in solutions that have to do with, the science and technology of things. But with the challenges that we're talking about, sustainability, climate, extremes and all that, they have to be implemented where people are and where people live and rule themselves or not. So the quality of the ability to respond and to take on things and do them well and do them in time makes a big difference. So I'm just curious what you found, Oliver, in your experience and Anne in the sort of cross-disciplinary work that you've done around the world, and insights you might have on that.
So just to make sure I don't ramble, you're asking what has been my experience trying to interface with the world of technology and
well, the solutions that you come with the assistance of everyone else who's involved in it, that we identify this is what we need to do to get to our net zero 2050 goals.
Right.
These are the things that are available technologically or otherwise, but then to get them done, they have to work through the city institutions.
Right. Okay.
And the neighborhoods and people and so on.
Yeah. So Greentown Labs, which is the world's largest clean tech incubator, is headquartered in Somerville. And so I've had the unusual experience of having much more contact with early stage clean tech companies than I'd say the typical, middle-sized city sustainability office, which is, focused on like recycling and, streetlights and things like that. So what I have found is a couple of things. One is that I can provide some value as a bureaucrat to explain to early stage companies what the, procurement and legal structure is that they would have to navigate to deploy their technology in a city, let alone with a city as a customer. And I am not an entrepreneur, so I know that there's probably a lot of other things rattling around the heads of people who work at those sorts of companies, but it's always a surprise to me how big the gap is in knowledge between, the two sides of the table that we sit on. Wow, it's like metaphors everywhere, but you get what I'm saying. Like there's a lot of teaching that I can do, and I find that I wish there was more of that in the tech sector. So that's sort of like the boring bureaucrat part of me. The other side is that I think that when you talk about sort of like how it affects community and people, I think that when it wasn't even that long ago, but when I started this job, it was just like solar, energy efficiency, using building management system data. And now there's just a real change in terms of looking at, whether it hits the target or not, but looking at social equity and all sorts of different kinds of people as being potentially impacted by energy and waste and water. So again, these are all kind of like the early stage clean tech companies that I talk to. It's been really interesting, and it makes me hopeful that a lot of this technology, when it makes its way through the bureaucratic maze, will not just be exactly what the city is looking for, what public customers are looking for their, energy or waste or water, but that they might actually have more social considerations in them. That's just some musings on the topic.
Any insight from your end?
The topic being how far removed some people are from, how strong the desire is to have impact, and how far removed the sort of the languages are is real. I mean, I see it in a very extreme version with the academics that I work with. I mean, Oliver, you're describing, these are clean tech guys and gals, I hope, and they would like to make products that they sell to us here in the city. And I tell them why that would be hard. I mean, that's like a dream conversation for me. The people I'm talking to are like, I have a theory of urban scaling that shows how certain levels of density over the course of 50 years are going to have a higher GDP. And I'm like, and they're like, so can you write a brief for me about that? And I'm just sort of like, dude, policy happens in political cycles, and you're thinking on a 50 to 100-year cycle. And that's why you're in the academy, and it's awesome. And we need people like you. But it's, I think your best bet, your best sort of theory of change, if you want to have one, is by influencing students to think bigger and having them realize, that a doohickey isn't going to necessarily solve all our problems, and that it is important to sort of think about how things are connected. Now, is the theory of urban scaling going to be the thing that lights that light? Maybe. And then you will have seen change. But I think they're all, many of the people I work with who are incredibly smart are also really hungry to see what they know change the world. And we need at least one level of professional in between them who can then identify an area of impact or practice or a sort of an institutional home for a translation of that knowledge. It's really, really difficult.
Really quickly, have the alliances of cities, the Blumberg 40 cities and this mayor's, has that been able to help you understand what's most impactful? And I'm saying quickly, we have about a minute and a half left, both Oliver and
Oliver,
Anne.
you go.
Yes. I will say there is obviously a big city bias, which in America is not where most people live. And so I think the scale and equity issues don't work in a lot of other places, but they drive the industry to the extent that there is one for policy level climate solutions. So yes.
And I just agree. I think yes, there are equity issues, but I also like that cities are being recognized as agents, as political agents in this fight.
And thank goodness in the United States, they're stepping up. So we have 2 minutes left. There was one question left. How does new construction get aligned with the climate goals? Was that strictly from the code that you've been able to set up, or what?
Yeah, so we only have real authority over new construction. Oh, that's what you're asking. Okay. Yeah, I mean, yes, our plan pretty much envisions all electric buildings, and that is exactly what is in the code. There's some extra things like different ways to prioritize higher quality vegetation and green or solar roofs, all great things. But yeah, oftentimes the planning goals don't actually end up being in code. And in this case, I'm happy to say that's what happened in Somerville.
And in Boston, if people are interested in that, in Boston, there's a new thing they abbreviated as BERDO, BERDO. And that is a process by which even big buildings are going to have to reduce their energy intensity over the next 30 years to get to net zero. So I want to thank you both very much. This has been very informative. The question and answer session was great. I want to remind people that the Energy, Environment, and Sustainability Network is for all MIT alums, wherever you are. We have ambassadors who help connect ideas between our groups. We do co-sponsor with some of our groups, and I Mostly, we really want you to get onto our mailing list. So if you go to our website, on the participate page, there are instructions for going into your MIT account and getting yourself onto our mailing list. But you can use the website too, just to find out what events are going on. So I really wanted to thank you. And if there are just final comments from Ann or Oliver and Raymond, I want to thank you all for coming today.
Thank you for
Thank you.
having me. It was really lovely.
I'll just say thank you for the audience to be here with us. We try to make these things so that they're useful and interesting to folks out there, and it really helps to see people actually show up.
And we're always looking for ideas.
Yes.
Ramon is our webinar committee lead, and just write to us at the EESN website. Thank you very
We're
much.
looking for good ideas, and usually our focus is on having alums who are talking and answering questions and so on. So, thank you.